Today, we're going to go on a little journey of discovery. We're going to trace the path from a simple what if all the way to a powerful scientific conclusion. So let's dive right in.
Have you ever just looked at the world around you and wondered, how? How do we know the things we know? How does this simple question, that little spark of curiosity, actually transform into a scientific fact that we can all build on? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down.
So the very first step in answering a big question is often to, well, make it smaller, to create a model. A model is kind of like a blueprint. It's a way for scientists to represent some piece of the natural world, especially for things that are way too big, too small, or just too complicated to see directly.
First up, you've got your physical models. These are the ones you can actually touch and mess around with. Think about a globe that represents the entire Earth, or a model of a DNA molecule. They let us see how all the parts of a system fit together on a scale we can actually understand.
Next, there are conceptual models. Now, these are the ideas or diagrams that help us picture things we can't physically see, like the structure of an atom or how energy flows through an ecosystem. The formula H2O is a perfect example, right? It's not actually water, but it's a super powerful concept that tells us exactly what a water molecule is made of.
Then we have mathematical models. These use the universal language of numbers, equations, graphs, you name it, to describe relationships in the real world. A classic you've probably seen is Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration, F equals ma. It's this beautiful, simple formula that can precisely predict how objects are going to move. And finally, we've got computational models. These basically take those mathematical models and feed them into powerful computers to simulate incredibly complex systems. I mean, anytime you check a weather forecast to see where a storm is heading, you're looking at the results of a really sophisticated computational model at work.
Okay, so once a scientist has an idea or a model, the next step is to make it a bit more formal. But here's the thing, not all scientific statements are created equal. This is where we have to be really precise about words like hypothesis, law, and theory.
Now, this slide right here, this is super important because it clears up a huge misconception. In everyday life, we might say, oh, that's just a theory, as in it's just a guess. But in science, a guess is a hypothesis, a specific, testable statement that hasn't been proven yet. A law, like the law of gravity, just describes a pattern we see. But a theory, a scientific theory, is the big one. It's a broad, well-tested, evidence-packed explanation for how and why things happen. It is absolutely not just a guess. It's the ultimate goal.
So, you've got your hypothesis. How do you find out if you're actually on the right track? Well, you've got to put it to the test. And that brings us to the very heart of the scientific process, the experiment.
When it comes to gathering data, scientists have two main approaches. On one side, you've got the controlled experiment, which usually happens in a lab. It's a totally artificial setting, where a scientist changes just one single thing to see what happens. And on the other side, you've got an observational study. This is when scientists study things out in their natural environment, like an astronomer watching a distant star. They just observe, they don't interfere.
To really get how a controlled experiment works, let's just design one ourselves. Let's imagine we want to test a hypothesis, that giving vitamins to squid will affect how long they live. Yeah, I know it sounds a little silly, but it's actually a perfect way to understand the most critical parts of any experiment.
First thing we need is an independent variable. This is the one and only thing that I, the scientist, am going to intentionally change. See that? I change the I-independent variable. So for our experiment, the independent variable is the vitamins. One group of squid gets them, one group doesn't. Simple as that.
So what comes next? The dependent variable. This is the result you're measuring. It's the data you're collecting. Its outcome depends on the change you made to the independent variable. For our squid, the dependent variable is their lifespan. We're measuring to see if their lifespan depends on whether or not they got those vitamins.
And this brings us to what is maybe the most important part, the controlled variables. Everything else, and I mean everything else, has to be kept exactly the same for both groups. For our squid, that means the same water temperature, the same kind of food, the same water quality. Why? Because if we changed those things too, we'd have no idea if a longer lifespan was because of the vitamins or because one tank was just cleaner. Without controlled variables, your results are pretty much meaningless.
All right, the experiment is finished. You've collected all your data. Now what? Well, now comes the really fun part, analyzing that data and looking for patterns or correlations. This is where we finally turn all those numbers into actual knowledge.
One of the most common patterns you'll see is direct proportionality. It's really simple. As one thing goes up, the other thing goes up too. Just think about driving a car. The faster you drive, the more distance you cover in an hour. On a graph, this always shows up as a nice, clear line sloping upwards.
And the opposite of that is an inverse proportionality. Here, as one variable goes up, the other one goes down. Think about trying to push something. If you use the same amount of force, a heavier, more massive object will accelerate less. So as mass goes up, acceleration goes down. And the graph for this kind of relationship slopes downwards.
And you know what? Sometimes you find absolutely nothing. This is called no correlation. It just means a change in one variable has no predictable effect on the other one. For example, there's probably no relationship between your shoe size and your grades in class. On a graph, this just looks like a random scatter of dots all over the place.
So the crucial thing to remember through all of this is that science isn't just a big book of facts that never change. It's a process. And this quote says it perfectly. We're always improving our understanding. New evidence and new questions can always challenge what we think we know today.
And honestly, that's the most beautiful part of it all. The journey from a question to a conclusion, it's a cycle, a process. It's not a final destination. Every single answer just leads to a bunch of new questions. So as we wrap this up, I'll just leave you with this thought. What question are you going to ask next?